Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this afternoon's session of the Share Value Leadership Summit. We kindly ask you make your way to your seats as our afternoon program is about to begin. Please welcome Laura Herman, Managing Director from FSG.
Hope you have had a chance to grab some lunch. And the afternoon's program is going to start with our next storyteller. So if you could join me in welcoming Datuk Redza to the stage. He'll kick us off this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Right. Okay, what I'm going to talk about today, I'm from Malaysia, by the way. I'm from Malaysia. I might look like someone from Mexico, but I'm Malaysian. People in Texas like to talk Spanish with me. But I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. Today, what I'd like to talk about is the journey, how we evolved, from doing the traditional shared value initiatives in Malaysia, which is essentially agriculture-based, into something else altogether, something different. The Malaysian climate is actually, it's a tropical climate, and the Malaysian government pursues a regional approach to economic growth with the understanding that each region is unique, each region has its own strengths, value propositions, idiosyncrasies, I suppose. So the most famous initiative that we had was our collaboration with Nestle to do this thing called the Nestle Paddy Club. And this caused farmers' incomes to increase by 196% because Nestle buys the products for baby food. So anything with a health, wellness and nutrition theme attached to it attracts a higher premium. So this was fine, And ladies and gentlemen, this initiative was actually inspired by Michael Porter. Surprise, surprise. And Jeffrey Sachs. So we did this very well in 3 states, and we're still implementing this. But we had a challenge. There's one state in the northernmost part of Malaysia, which is very small, which has, the size is about a bit more than 300 square miles. It's the smallest state in Malaysia. It's even smaller than some of the districts in Malaysia. They did not want shared value on agriculture because they said, don't you have other things? Why not you use something that we have in abundance? The message was, no, you're not having any of our land. But what do they have in abundance? I asked. They said, we have the sun. So I said, okay. But solar farms needed land also, right? You need land for solar farms. How did we do this? Okay, you see this picture. There's a smiling man there. That's the chief minister of the smallest state of Perlis. He wasn't smiling when he said that to me about the sun, but he's smiling now because we managed to come up with an alternative. We managed to come up with a model to use shared value. But this wasn't a walk in the park. I had to be persuaded by Dr. Michael Porter to actually persevere, because we've never done something like this before, and we were entering into an alien territory. So the target was the B40 group, which is the bottom 40% of the population, those who earn incomes below $750 a month. So how did we approach? The plus point here is that the government had a list of those who earn below $750 a month. So we targeted them, and we did an initiative which was a bit different. We put solar panels on their houses. We put solar panels on their houses. But if you look at these pictures, there's only one house that had solar panels on the house, on the roofs of the house. There's only one house. because most of the houses cannot take the weight of the solar panels. So we had to build something like a porch. And this was the start of a new journey for us. This was the start of a new journey for us. This was the start of a new journey for the country. Yeah, and of course we worked with the private sector because the positioning, the economic positioning, was that the private sector should drive economic development, with the government merely playing the role of enabler and facilitator. Because without the private sector, you cannot have continued economic growth. You cannot have continued resilience, yeah, to economic endeavors. So how do we do this? First of all, we needed to get the private sector to install the panels. In Malaysia, every individual could bid, can bid for a quota to actually produce solar energy to be sold to the national grid. But the biggest challenge was how do we get people to afford? Yeah, how can we get people to afford to buy solar panels, because these are quite prohibitive. The cost of a solar panel will be a bit more than $10,000 in Malaysia for 4 kilowatts. And why 4 kilowatts? That's about the size of a house for the B40, for the bottom 40% of the population. So it's the same price as the house. If you have a house, if you have that money, would you buy a house or a solar panel? House, right? So we got the private sector to come in, and they took the quotas, from the population, and they used these quotas to install the solar panels. So what happened afterwards? First, the participants sell. Yeah, they have. If you look at the picture on top, where the family is standing just below the porch, you have 2 meters. Yeah, 1 meter to sell, and the other meter is a consumption meter. So participants sell electricity to the utility provider, and the utility provider actually pays the participants. They get monthly income direct into their bank accounts. And the income can go up to $165 a month. If you're earning $750, getting 165 extra is indeed a sizable chunk to supplement your income. And so income increased by roughly about 25%. Now, the plus point to this is it's a scenario where everybody wins. It's a scenario where everybody gets to participate in production of green energy. I'll show you the impact. Yeah, NBOS is called the National Blue Ocean Strategy. This is where the government focuses on quick results, minimal cost, high impact. Yeah, for the population, you get the generation of passive income. For the government, it is in line with their commitment during the World Economic Forum to reduce their 45% of carbon emissions by the year 2030. For the company, generation of extra income, because this would be a source which they never had before. Yeah, because they're using quotas which would otherwise not be accorded to them. And for the environment, of course, this is blindingly obvious. Yeah, you have a different way of generating power. You have a different way of generating energy, which is through solar. And people who used to have sources of income from tapping rubber. Yeah, if you look at the picture, there's a rubber tapper. Picture of people who worked in paddy fields, and someone who sells hot cakes in night markets. So these are the people who get additional income arising from this new endeavor that we have. Okay, in principle, what is different? The difference is they are the ones who are helping the company to earn additional income. They are the ones who are helping the company to earn profits. And this is not CSR by any chance whatsoever. It is a sustainable income where they sign agreements that they would get this income for 21 years. So this is a new way of doing things. And on top of that, we also encourage training programs on solar energy, on solar panel installations. And of course, this was one of the initiatives that was selected to be rolled out nationwide. Previously, it was only in the smallest state in the country, but now we've been given approval by the government for the private sector to implement this nationwide so that more people can benefit from helping this company to earn income. Yeah. So guys, I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been of some value, but I would like to thank Dr. Michael Porter for actually insisting that this was something that could work. Yeah, I had some doubts. I did a Yoda thing on him. I said, clouded the future is. But he wouldn't have anything of the sort. And he said, persevere. So this is what I'm here today to tell you this story. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you. Great. Well, help me to welcome our next panelist for the next issue spotlight. We should not need any Yoda tricks, I think, for this conversation. We have a chance to reflect on the opportunities to create shared value through gender equity. And as we know, shared value can be created through products and market innovations, through value chain innovations, through ecosystems investments. And I'm thrilled that this afternoon we'll have a chance to talk about the first two of those with our panelists. As CEO of Banco BHD León, we welcome Stephen Puig here. His bank has garnered market share and customer loyalty by anticipating the banking needs of women. It's a Dominican Republic bank, and through the financial security that has been provided to these women, they're driving towards parity and accountability and opportunity that have not been realized before, also driving a competitive advantage for the bank. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
As co-founder and CEO of WEConnect, Elizabeth Vazquez has worked with dozens of multinational companies, many of you in the room, to identify women-owned businesses all around the world who can participate in global value chains, driving, again, economic opportunity and greater stability in the value chains of some of the world's largest companies. So welcome, Elizabeth. So we're going to explore why gender equity is a competitive strategy in and of itself. At the end of our comments, there will be time for questions, so fire up your Slido website, and we'll turn to those questions in just a few moments. Stephen, can we start with you? Tell us about how BHD León recognized the opportunity to serve the women's market and what it's meant for the bank's business in terms of growth and profitability.
Sure. Well, about 5 years ago, about 5.5 years ago, the bank launched a credit card, which was a women's credit card. Usually when you mention this sort of product at a conference focused on gender, you see a lot of eyes rolling because they say, well, what is this, pink washing? Or are you simply taking a credit card that has no genuine value proposition for women and calling it a women's card? That was just before I joined the bank, I should say. But it wasn't actually pink washing. There was a genuine value proposition behind this card. It, for example, covered cervical cancer, breast cancer, which, although it's not entirely 100% unique to women, it primarily manifests itself in women. And seeing that this card had had very good acceptance among customers there, we asked ourselves whether or not we should do something that would be much broader ranging across all of our customer segments and across all of our products. So we delved into that to see what we might do in that sense and looked for partners that could help us explore that possibility. We identified two: the Global Banking Alliance for Women, which is an alliance of banks Elizabeth and I have participated in. We're actually participating on the board now of that particular organization, which fosters the development of programs such as this among commercial banks throughout the world. And also the IFC, part of the World Bank, had developed a team that accompanied banks that wanted to go on this sort of journey. So we hired the IFC team, and we worked on this for about a year, and identified a huge opportunity in terms of our business. Essentially, we looked at the demographics both for our country and also globally, and realized that women make 80% of household decisions, both in our country and globally as well. Women in our own country are graduating at much higher rates than men, and garnering many more honors in universities than men as well. We saw other stats, such as the fact that among SMEs, women in our country own 22 to 44% of SMEs. Unfortunately, 22% related to those that are the larger ones, and 44% of the smaller ones. And as a universal bank, which does business with customers that range from micro entrepreneurs to those that have project financings, we were keen to see what we might be able to do in all of these segments. So we embarked on about 6 or 7 months worth of market research, and tried to understand those things that motivate Dominican women as potential bank customers, both as heads of households as well as leaders of small businesses for the most part as well. And we launched our program, and in terms of results to date, it's been something that's exceeded our expectations. We came up with a business case that had an internal rate of return of over 100%, and we have actually been reaching the returns that we had anticipated in our business case since then. So it's been a very satisfying experience for us in terms of the business that we've garnered.
Wonderful, wonderful. Did you want to show us a quick video?
Oh yes. Aside from the business impact that that this program has had, it has also helped us reach segments that we didn't anticipate we might be reaching. For example, I think one of the big challenges any bank has in most places is how to reach millennials. And last November, during the International Day Against Violence Towards Women, we launched this particular campaign that we're going to show on a video now.
In the Day of No Violence Against Women, the BH de León Bank set out a simple task: teach women how to identify possessive men before getting involved with them. The interventions were done in the main universities, where the young female population is at an age of formalizing their romantic relationships. In a matter of hours and in an organic manner, the action became a trending topic, becoming the main subject of the debate of how violence can be disguised as love.
Este es un tema que no se le puede dejar a las autoridades. Tenemos que involucrarnos todos. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? ¿Seguir contando muertas? No.
So through this campaign, we were able to reach university students, which are a difficult target for us as a traditional bank. And this is in addition to the business that we've garnered with our existing clients. We've grown the number of customers that we have that are women customers from 345,000 to 500,000 at a growth rate of approximately 13% per annum over the last 4 years. In addition to that, the number of products that our women banking clients has grown from 1.94 to over 2.2 per customer, which is a lot in our business. And the number of actual products sold to our women customers has increased from a little over 600,000 to about 1.1 million products per year. So, we've grown the regular business, and in addition to that, through this initiative, we've been able to reach other segments that have been more difficult to reach in the past for us.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you. Elizabeth, many of the small businesses that Stephen was referring to are just the kinds of businesses that you're working with. Help us understand the shared value argument for companies to channel their sourcing through those companies.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here with both of you and all of you to have this conversation about gender equity and inclusive sourcing in particular. And I think there's a slide just so that it's understood that this isn't a passing trend. These are corporations that are spending their time and money to create a nonprofit called WEConnect to find the world's best suppliers. Right now, they spend $1 trillion on products and services. About 1% of that is with women-owned businesses globally. That's a huge business problem that we have to fix. Think about it. You just told us that women make or influence over 80% of the consumer purchasing decisions. They're about 1/3 of the world's businesses. We're half the population. And it's not good business to not include your customers in your value chain as your suppliers of products and services to anticipate the needs of your market. So yes, there are huge CSR or social benefits to being inclusive in sourcing practices, but this is business. These companies want to continue to be the most profitable. They want to have the access to the best suppliers, the innovation. They also need their communities to grow. They need companies that are agile and that will create jobs. Again, to create a consumer base and a good base of employees and leaders. And so there's a huge opportunity here if every organization was more conscious of their purchasing power, how we spend our money. We want to talk about shared value and opportunities to increase equal opportunity and sustainable growth and inclusive growth. All we have to do is start with how we spend our money. It's really not that complicated. And so this is a really exciting time where these companies are looking at their value chains. And it's not just with women-owned businesses. It's all underutilized communities that aren't engaged. It's people representing ethnic diversity or LGBT communities or people with disabilities. Any community where they have an interest in those leaders to be successful in starting and growing businesses and creating jobs is a market where they need to be active, and they need to let those communities know that they're open for business, that we buy from you, you buy from us. This is business, it's trade, and we can do a lot of good work together in the process.
So while the percentage of purchasing from women-owned businesses is small, can you give us some examples so that we know these aren't sort of cute microcredit arrangements so that we can understand the scope and the scale of some of these partnerships?
Sure, so we're doing a project with the World Bank. They just became a corporate member because they too have purchasing power all over the world and influence. And so we're doing a project with the IFC in Bangladesh, and we needed to map what are the women-owned businesses in Bangladesh doing, what products, what services, and what are the corporations in Bangladesh buying, what products, what services. It was really, really interesting. I can't tell you the number of women-owned businesses we met with who have, yes, several of them had a lot of them were sole entrepreneurs, but a lot more that we met with were employers of hundreds of people. And then, of course, I met the woman-owned business who has 20,000 employees in the garments industry. And I thought, wow, that's pretty exceptional. But then I was in Singapore last week and met with one of the Walmart suppliers. She's making 62 million garments a year. These are businesses at scale, owned by women, controlled by women, managed by women, and just knocking it out of the park in every sector. And I was in Mexico last year we did a buyer-seller conference. We work with women-owned businesses in 100 countries, and we have local representatives in 25 countries. And in our Mexico conference, and you have to be careful what we assume about women, I have to be careful with that. There was a woman making plastic manufacturing, and another doing steel manufacturing, and another who did male urinals, which I thought was interesting. And then a textiles company. I was like, oh, she's got the garments out and the pillows. But shame on me, because the Hilton representative who was hosting us, the buyer walked by her booth. She was the only one that got a contract that day because that buyer wanted those pillows in every room and then asked her, could she do the runners on the beds? And by the way, could she do matching curtains? And then there are things that they needed throughout the rest of the hotel. And if that contract goes well, there are other Hilton properties that might also be interested in what she's offering. So it's really exciting when we don't underestimate the potential of the contributions of underutilized communities.
Yeah, those are great examples. So you're both in positions to help grow these businesses. Stephen, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the bank seeks to serve those women business owners who are looking to take their businesses to scale.
Sure. In terms of our approach, we look to serve them not so much through specific products, although I will mention a few products in a second, but through value propositions. Mm-hmm. So our work with IFC led us to focus on value propositions for women as heads of households as well as heads of business. And in addition to that, the work that we did to set up the program led us to was also to change the way in which we approach women customers. Traditionally, we were a bank that focused on pushing and selling products as opposed to having a consultative sale approach and listening better. And what the research in our country showed us was that women wanted to be accompanied in important financial decisions, business owners included, as well as heads of households, because these were important decisions for them, and that's what they expected from their financial institutions. And I have to say, to this day, even though we've been at this for a few years, this still remains one of our biggest challenges, is convincing our sales force to change the way they approach women customers in terms of the sale itself. Now, having said all of that, in terms of products that we've been offering and services, we came up for women that own businesses with another credit card that's focused on their business needs, which provides basically assistance through one of our partners, Mafre, which is the largest Spanish insurer, one of the top 10 in the world. We have assistance services that are offered for things such as taxes or handling employee issues, et cetera. It's kind of a one-stop initial shop for consultations that they might have as business owners. I see that one of the key things in shared value is partnerships. That's one of the key partnerships that we've had. Another one has been with multilateral institutions. Elizabeth just mentioned the IFC. Again, they've been a good partner for us as well. We developed funding for women-owned businesses in our country that wasn't readily available recently, which is long-term, fixed-rate local currency lending, something that typically doesn't exist in our country and other developing markets as well. And more recently, the IDB, another good partner, has also provided us with a $50 million facility, which is going to have a specific gender emphasis as well. It was approved a few months ago. We expect to sign that in the next few weeks. And it also includes technical assistance for ourselves to get an external certification from EDGE in Switzerland in terms of what we're doing in terms of gender. And then lastly, I'll mention a third partnership, which has been a partnership that we've done with local universities. We've established 3. These universities have SME centers that were sponsored by the government initially. We're the only local bank that has become a partner in these as well, taking advantage of these partnerships to be able to train women-led businesses so that they can be more successful in their activities.
Outstanding. Outstanding. And Elizabeth, obviously you're working with these business owners as well to help bring their businesses to scale. What are some of the mechanisms that WEConnect can provide to help scale those businesses?
So I think it's interesting. I think in the women business owner community, or the women's economic empowerment community, historically we've been very focused on access to finance, and it's mostly been microfinance and training at the grassroots level. And all of that is extremely, extremely important because we have to build a pipeline. But we also have to look at those businesses that are growth oriented, because what we need most in any country that I go to are jobs. We desperately need jobs. We need SMEs that are willing and able to take the risks to grow their companies. I find that when women have contracts with the corporations we work with, the banks tend to chase them. Investors tend to chase them. If they don't have sales and they don't have contracts, they're in real trouble. So I think we've had it a little bit backwards. We've done a lot on the finance and the training. We need to do a lot more, and you're a great example of what can be done and what must be done in all these different countries. But at the end of the day, these companies need to have sales. And so I do hope that in working with the various partners in this room, with FSG and everything that you've done, with Win-Win Strategies, with a lot of these organizations, the GBA and others, that we can do a better job of linking access to markets with access of finance and linking that with the right type of training that really helps to scale. And then of course with IBM, with how do we leverage technology as an entrepreneurial enabler, but it's an ecosystem approach. You cannot do one thing and expect to have impact that's measurable at scale in our lifetime. But I do think if we can just leverage our purchasing power, it's a really, really good start.
A good start. So you both have sort of alluded to the organizational change that might accompany some of these commitments. And I wonder if you could talk more about that. What are some of those organizational or normative barriers that you might see in organizations that you're really working against, and how can our audience start to identify those and work on those inside their own organizations?
Well, I think that in terms of our culture internally, the first thing that we tried to do was to communicate how the gender initiative was aligned with our strategy. And if you look at our strategy, we have a simple temple design, the roof being what we try to do to serve our customers, which is basically, as a bank, to help them develop their good ideas, whether it be sending their kids to college or whether it be starting a new business and developing that business. And if you look at the temple that we have, it has 4 pillars. The second pillar is growing our recurring business. And when you have 42% of your clients who are women, I think you tend to be pretty aligned then with having some sort of gender initiative if you want to grow your business. So getting that out of the way, then the challenge for us in terms of cultural change was making sure that we had leadership throughout the institution for the initiative. I was very fortunate our chairman supported it from the outset, the vice chairman, our board as well. And then what we did was set up a cross-functional team representing all of the areas of our institution to lead the initiative. And actually, against the advice of one of our external advisors, we've kept that in place until now. Instead of designating a vice president for gender or having this managed in HR or PR or some other area where I've seen it managed elsewhere, we have this team that continues to meet to this day monthly to see how our results are going. And I think that's worked fairly well. In addition to that, I think something that's very important for this cultural change is to have consistency in what you're doing. I remember when we were about to launch 4 years ago, we heard a rumor that another bank was about to do something in terms of the gender space, and we got nervous temporarily, and then we just stepped back and said, hey, we've been at this for a year. If somebody's really going to do this, it's going to take them a while to develop something that's sustainable. And then on top of that, you have to be consistently in the market. And we drew up a chart of everything that we were going to do for the following 12 months, which is something we've continued to do on how we're present month after month, either bringing one of the value propositions that we were developing to market or building upon those after we'd launched them initially, and also commemorating certain key dates throughout the year in which gender is relevant. And then lastly, I would also mention that to foster behavioral change, we've also sought and been a leader in some of the certifications that are offered in the gender space. Our country, following UN guidelines, has launched a certification called Igualando RD. In December, we were the very first company to receive this certification, and it's offered on 3 different levels: bronze, silver, gold. So from the get-go, out of the gate, we reached the gold level, which was a big satisfaction for our team. But at the same time, it establishes that commitment to maintaining this sort of focus throughout the organization as well. And that's why we're also looking forward to other certifications, such as the EDGE certification.
Yeah. Great. And Elizabeth?
So I think for us, it's an interesting time to have to match macroeconomic dynamics with on-the-ground, micro-level engagement at the grassroots level, and then everything in between with a true value chain approach. And the reason that's important is because we have, I think it's over $63 trillion global GDP, right? So there's tons of money out there, but women are literally invisible in those value chains and generally do not own the world's assets. And it's really hard to build assets in an asset-based lending environment if you don't have assets in the first place. So it is, while entrepreneurship isn't the answer to poverty alleviation and inclusive growth, we won't be able to do it effectively if we don't look at who are the growth-oriented businesses in those communities. And I think it's interesting, just with all the different friends that are in this room and with Secretary Clinton coming, I mean, WEConnect, I think, embodies a lot of what could be done when the public sector, private sector, civil society, and the women themselves come together. And I say that because when we first started in 2009, the first grant we received as a 501c3 actually came from the State Department. And the Clinton team said, we need to make this happen and there's urgency to this. Let's do a pilot in Peru. So we did that, and then Chile, and then Costa Rica, and then Mexico, and then Central America. And because of that work, the Rockefeller Foundation said, well, what could we do in Africa? So then it was Nigeria and South Africa. And so it's because we are looking at how can we bring the stakeholders together, but then on the ground, you really have to work with the local chambers of commerce, the associations of women business owners, the government agencies that have already found some of these businesses and developed their capacity, but they don't necessarily have connections to actual markets to sell their stuff. And so it's very interesting to have to pay attention to that entire spectrum of dynamics in such a fast-paced global economy, and yet if we don't do that, we're going to miss out. So right now, just with WEConnect members alone, right? If it's 1% of spend, that means $10 billion. To double that spend to 2%. But that's $10 billion worth of products and services, income going to women who in turn will employ people and know how to get those contracts to be able to get from 2% to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. And so it's also systems changes. It's the ability of corporations to track their spend with the communities they care about. So you actually have to look at their vendor management systems and be able to flag things and see trends over time. So there is a lot going on, but it's not rocket science, and it's really great being a part of that journey.
Yeah. That's great. One of the questions that's come in that's similar to one I was going to ask is really the role of the board. And Stephen, you mentioned the support you got from your board chair and the vice chair. What do CEOs need from their boards when it comes to driving gender equity through the organization?
Well, in our case, it was that initial, to go ahead with the program that we had presented to them, and then on top of that, to continue supporting what we've been doing. I think that, at that level, that's what basically we need. I will say, in terms of our board, we have a board of 15 members, of which 4 are women, and I think that the other thing that we need at the board level is for gender equity at the board itself. So, 4 out of 15, it's not bad by many other standards that we've seen, but there's room for improvement there as well.
Yep, great. And another question that's come in for Elizabeth: how do you see this opportunity varying by region?
Yeah, so I think that's the funny thing about having just been in Bangladesh, where everyone said, "Oh, it's going to be so hard. Women are so small, and the corporates aren't going to care, and the government doesn't get it." And I found the opposite to be true. We've had a really hard time in Europe, where everyone stands behind this privacy protection laws. We're not allowed to ask who's a woman-owned business or ethnically diverse business, so we just can't do it. Whereas you go to Bangladesh, and we met with these women-owned businesses. They're like, okay, we want to take a part of this. We want to buy from each other. We want to get into global markets. And then we met with the CEOs of the largest holding companies in the country. These are massive global conglomerates. And these men said within 5 minutes after we explained what we do, they're like, yeah, we get the business case. Do you have a database? Happy to buy from women. We're not probably buying from women right now. No one's ever asked us about it. We're happy to do it. Can you make it easy for us? Do you know where these women are? And then, of course, we'd be happy to consider them. We won't give them a contract because they're women-owned, but we'd be happy to invite them to compete. So for me, it's just been really, really interesting, the assumption of where we thought this work would be super easy and well received, and then other places where we thought it would be super hard, and in fact it's being embraced as an opportunity for inclusive growth for everyone, and they get it. So it is different. It does depend by country and by region, but it's been a surprising journey.
Wonderful. I think we've got time for maybe just our last question. There's a great one that came in, looking ahead 5 years. Where would you like to see the industry in terms of financial services or the large companies sourcing from women-owned business? What do the next 5 years hold for us, do you think?
Well, in our case, since we've been fortunate to participate with the Global Banking Alliance, we have our finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in our region. When we first joined the GBA, there were, I think, 2 other banks from our region that were members, one in Costa Rica, and if I recall correctly, one in Mexico. And we've seen that number multiply 2 or 3 times. So I think that we're actually, in our particular industry, the commercial banking industry, because this happened in microfinance years ago, 20 years ago, where at least half of the micro entrepreneurs tend to be women in our region. But in commercial banking, it hasn't been as prevalent. But I think it's something that's taking off, and in the next 5 years, I would anticipate that we'll see many more banks that are interested in doing this. We ourselves, myself and some of my colleagues, have acted as mentors through GBA to 3 or 4 other institutions in our region that are taking this up. So I anticipate we'll see a lot more of this.
So if I could wave a magic wand, I would like to not be in business, not have to certify that these are women-owned businesses and introduce them to buyers because they already know how to sell into these supply chains and they're being actively sought after. Realistically, I would love to have 1 million women-owned businesses in our database that are providing all types of products and services in more than 100 countries, and all of you actively engaged, leveraging your purchasing power, and making sure you have access to the world's best suppliers. So I think just starting with the FSG community, that alone, even though there's a lot of overlap with WEConnect already, but that alone would have a huge transformational impact. And I think we need to do it with urgency because there is so much money sitting on the table, and we need to make sure that these businesses have equal opportunity to compete and win.
Thank you. It's clear the shared value framework, provides plenty of opportunity for any organization to think about gender equity as a competitive strategy. We will not wait 5 years to ask this question again. We will look forward to following the progress along the way. But please join me in thanking Elizabeth and Stephen for their contributions. Our next speakers, I'm pleased to invite to the stage include my colleague Nicole Trimble from FSG and Kathleen McLaughlin from Walmart.
Hi. I'm Nicole Trimble. I lead the Workforce and Talent Initiative here at FSG through the Shared Value Initiative. And I'm so grateful to have Kathleen here with us, who's the Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Walmart. Many of you heard Dr. Porter yesterday throwing a lot of love at Walmart. And he even said that Walmart's transitioning their entire company to having a shared value mindset. And he provided several examples of how they're doing that with workforce. And so we're going to talk with Kathleen today a little bit about how she's looking at transforming workforce at Walmart and the whole ecosystem of our workforce community in the US. A couple things about Kathleen, just so you know how special this moment is to have her here. Kathleen, before this position, was at McKinsey for over 20 years. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She's a mom of 3. And just last week was named, we love fortune lists here at the Shared Value Initiative. She was named number 23 on the world's greatest leaders on fortune lists. So, and I think, was Oprah 25?
My kids pointed that out.
Yeah.
That's maybe my crowning achievement in life. Something like that.
Pretty cool. It's pretty cool. No big deal, right? No big deal. So, and you know who's right after us? Alan Murray from Fortune.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Not who you thought I was going to say, but yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. To set the stage for those of you that don't live, sleep, eat, and breathe workforce like Kathleen and I do, and for those of you that aren't necessarily based in the U.S., we're at a historical moment with the U.S. workforce. 46% of employers in the U.S. are having trouble finding talent. Yet 11 million people are unemployed, disproportionately people of color. And the mismatch is often a skills gap. To add that to a global perspective, if you add the EU to that, it's about 285 million unemployed and about over 850 million underemployed. And so we're seeing this burgeoning change in workforce, not just because of the tightening labor force, but also because of AI, automation, changing demographics. And Walmart, Kathleen was given this incredible honor from Fortune around the sustainability work at Walmart. But really what it was about was unbundling. And what Walmart has done so well is looked at the ecosystem and tried to play across the whole ecosystem, and that's what they're doing with workforce as well. So we're really looking forward to hearing about how you're taking a leadership perspective here and how others can follow. So Kathleen, can you tell us what motivates you personally to do this work, and why has Walmart chosen to make workforce a pillar of its shared value strategy?
Yeah, happy to. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be here with all of you today. It's my honor. I joined Walmart about 5 years ago, as you said, after many years at McKinsey. And the reason that I left McKinsey and went to Walmart is I had been working for quite some time with clients in the retail sector. Actually, none of them Walmart. I had all other retail clients. About 2/3 of my work, and then about 1/3 of my work was in the social sector. And in both sets of clients, I was working on transformation. How do you transform organizations, or in some cases, broader systems for better health, better performance? And one of the central questions we were looking at, especially in the system transformation work, was how to engage the private sector in large-scale system transformations. So the things I was more focused on were things like global health, some agriculture, things like that. So I got a call from my friend Sylvia Burwell, actually, who was at the Walmart Foundation. She was president of the Walmart Foundation, and she said, listen, I'm going to go work for Obama, and you should move down to Arkansas. And I said, Sylvia, I'm not moving to Arkansas. Are you kidding? I was living in Canada, I had 3 Canadian children, Canadian husband. But she said, no, you need to look at this. And so I went down to Bentonville, spent a day. I met the leadership team there, and I was so surprised because, again, I'd never served Walmart. My clients were all these other retailers, and I didn't really know that much about Walmart, except what we all read in the paper, which frankly wasn't super great most of the time. I was so surprised by the people I met, the aspirations, the assets, what they were already working on, and this vision that they had, which was to bring the foundation alongside the business and say, what could we do with our business assets to drive value for society on critical issues, but in a way that also strengthens the business. So just intellectually for me, that was really interesting because that's what I had been writing and working on with all of my other clients at McKinsey. And when it comes to economic opportunity, as part of that agenda, it was personally very resonant with me because probably like many people in this room, if I look at my own family history, my family, 2 generations ago, they were barely getting by. Nobody certainly went to college, let alone maybe even not finished high school, my grandparents. And along, over the generations, we've had all of these opportunities just develop. That's the story of a lot of Americans. And in my own personal life, I was so fortunate to have so many opportunities to go to a great high school, have a family that valued education, to be able to get a scholarship and go to university. These were opportunities that I personally have benefited from substantially in my life, and has opened up all kinds of opportunity for the next generation of my family, my own kids. And so this question of what kind of opportunity do we provide every person in this country is a personally deeply meaningful question for me. So when I joined Walmart, this was about 5 years ago, it was with the understanding that we were going to work on sustainability of supply chains, also community initiatives, a lot of great things Walmart's been doing around disaster relief and hunger relief and so on. But this question of economic opportunity was a big one and a big part of the agenda from day one. And that's why I joined the company.
Thanks. And so you personally walked in knowing that economic opportunity was important to you. What is the business value for Walmart to be investing in economic opportunity, workforce, and talent?
Yeah. So workforce development is a massive shared value opportunity, not just for Walmart, but retailers in general, and we think the private sector writ large, and then the country, right? And it's probably for many, many obvious reasons I don't need to go into here. But to talk a little bit about Walmart specifically, in 2013, it was a couple years into some commitments Walmart had made around another asset that the company has that can drive economic development, which is the purchase order. And you just heard Elizabeth and some others talking about the value of that purchase order to create economic opportunity for suppliers. The company had made a couple of commitments that were tied to the recession. And they had made those commitments in 2011. So one was to invest an incremental $250 billion in purchase orders in US manufacturing. That's over and above what Walmart was already sourcing, which is most of the products that Walmart sells in any country come from the local market. A lot of people think everything comes from somewhere else, but most of it already does come locally. But it was an incremental $250 billion through the purchase order. They also had made some commitments in 2011 to source from women-owned businesses, and it's how we've come to work with WEConnect and some others. So to source $20 billion from women entrepreneurs over a 5-year period. So they'd already done that. And they were looking at the other big asset, which is people. And in 2013, very heightened level of competitive intensity in retail, partly because of Amazon and e-commerce and the challenge that poses to traditional bricks and mortar retailers. And Walmart, like many other retailers, was in the midst of, and still is, a massive transformation to move from a pure bricks and mortar company to an omni-channel retail company. And the expectations that customers have of the experience in shopping, whether it's online or walking into a store, is much higher now than it was 10, 20 years ago. So the competitive environment was very intense. And as Walmart took a look at the scores they were getting from customers around that experience, it was not great. It was not competitive. It had been a couple years of very sluggish sales growth, and customer feedback around the experience wasn't where it needed to be. And so people sat back and said, okay, we have a business problem, which is how are we going to improve the customer proposition in our stores, let alone e-commerce proposition, multi-channel, everything else we're doing with technology, to really serve the customer the way he and she want to be served. A big part of that is our people, their skill level, their engagement, how they interact with the customer, and we need to lift that up. So that was a business challenge. The societal challenge at the same time was similar, which is around coming out of 2008. To your point, employment levels, the markets were starting to tighten up in terms of labor, but a lot of people sitting out of the labor market and not participating. And what we now know from research that's been done recently by McKinsey and many others is general stagnation in terms of upward economic mobility. McKinsey did this study that they published last year that showed for the first time really in historical memory, in the last decade, 80% of American households have not advanced economically. 80%. It's never been that high. So, we didn't have that information back in 2013, but we had a sense that there was something around mobility. And then if you look at retail specifically, retail historically has had a reputation as the land of the dead-end jobs, right? Low-wage jobs, don't go. It's actually not the case in terms of the opportunity that's presented by the sector. If you look at things like, for example, even at Walmart, 75% of our store managers started as hourly entry-level people. So there's tremendous opportunity to move up, but it's not the experience of everybody. So from a societal perspective, the question is, how can you take a sector like retail, which has incredibly low barriers to entry into work, right? It's very easy to get a job in retail. You can come into the workforce, attach yourself to a job. The question is, how can you advance? So in 2013, we spent really the next year talking to a lot of people, spent time with academics, spent time with workforce development experts, obviously a lot of time with our associates, with people in government, with people in traditional educational institutions, community colleges and universities, more innovative startup companies that were trying to do workforce development, asking the question, what would need to be true for retail to take all of its entry-level roles and make it a more systematic springboard to opportunity and upward mobility? And really all of 2014, we engaged in that. We developed a strategy that had two parts. One was for the company, and one was for the Walmart Foundation and what we could do for the retail sector as a whole. And we launched that two-part strategy in February of 2015 at Opportunity Nation. And that was about 3 years ago. We've been really pursuing it in earnest since then, and I can talk more about it if it's of interest.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. But one of the things that you said is that wages or family income has stagnated, but productivity has doubled or tripled, right? And so as we look at automation, as we look at AI, we will continue to have productivity gains. We see this coming. What is Walmart doing to ensure that the workforce can keep up with that?
Yeah, well, it's funny, when we started this a few years ago, we weren't thinking about future of work or automation or any of those things that have become such a big part of our discourse now. Those trends just heighten the need to invest in workforce development. What we found and what we put at the centerpiece of our strategies was focus on helping adult workers, incumbent workers, build new skills. So the old world that says, okay, you go to school, then you get a job, and now you're at work, and off you go. That doesn't work anymore for anyone. It doesn't work for entry-level people, doesn't work for us in advanced positions. So this dynamism in the labor market, the need to evolve the skills that we have and grow and acquire new skills to just sustain where we are, let alone move ahead, that's really core. And so, if you look at recent studies about what the impact of automation will be. There's a McKinsey Global Institute study, and by the way, I look at other studies too, not just McKinsey really ones. Like, I did used to work there.
This one is really good, though.
But this is a good one.
This is really good.
They did analysis to say, okay, well, what's really going to happen? We've all seen the two extreme scenarios. Sky is falling, all the jobs are going away, the robots, or don't worry, everything's fine. The McKinsey study comes out somewhere in the middle that says, look, this is a massive transformation. It's less about jobs just going away and there's no work. The jobs will have about as many or more jobs depending on economic growth scenarios. The issue is everything does change. So the skills you need are going to be different. So what we've been doing in the company is embedding the development of people just in the job. If you are a frontline incumbent worker, you can't go back to school. How can you do that? You're working. So what we've done is we've created a Pathways program, which is a very basic retail fundamentals program. First 90 days on the job just helps you basically learn the ropes to get off at a good start. We've raised the starting wage to a minimum of $11 and expanded our benefits because we found stability in that first 18 to 24 month period when you're just starting is critical. So more financial stability to allow you to stick in the job, to retain and get the skills. And then we've created something called the Walmart Academy, which is 200 physical places around the country, each one within an hour's drive of any Walmart associate. And that's for developing more advanced skills that move people from entry level to supervisory positions, specialist positions, produce department, electronics department, and so on, and hourly supervisor roles that then are the first stage toward being a store manager.
And how many people last year did you put through the
so
academies?
We have put 325,000 people through the academy. And they're graduating cap and gown certificates. These are meaningful skills that would allow them to succeed not only at Walmart, but anywhere in the service sector. Yeah. So through the foundation, we're working with many others, competitor retailers, community colleges, startups like Opportunity at Work, Burning Glass, Kale, workforce boards, a broad range of FSG. Yeah, no, FSG's been a great partner in terms of really helping with research and understand what's the business case and what works and what doesn't for people's advancement and other things we've had going around hiring fairs and so on. So trying to strengthen the ecosystem and make upskilling of incumbent workers the norm, make it easier, use technology, serious games, online colleges, boot camps, other approaches that would help people acquire relevant skills for work on the job and just make that the way that we all operate now.
Thanks. So as we close out, one last question that if you could let everybody know, we have a lot of employers in the room. A lot of people might say, oh, Walmart can do this. They have the whole world and the resources. What's something that every employer should be thinking about doing with the new world of work in front of us?
Well, so some of what we're doing is hard unless you have the resources to do it. So for example, the Walmart Foundation, we have a whole grants program. We're spending $100 million in grants over 5 years on this. But you don't need to do that to do what I'm talking about, which is, this is about system transformation. This is about culture change. This is about every employer viewing their people in terms of opportunity for those individuals, and investing in the upskilling on the job. Can be through coaching, can be through training. There are a lot of resources that communities are making available to help upskill incumbent workers. It has to do with how you hire based on skill and not credentials, how you promote based on skill and not other markers of success. And so there are lots of resources becoming available to help companies of any size take this approach. As I said, our goal is to make this the norm, to make this just the way that everybody works, and we'd be quite excited to share that. One thing I would suggest, there's a group called Rework America, a task force that many people have come together across sectors, and there are many resources available through that. So I'd suggest you take a look at that. It's an initiative out of the Markle Foundation. Take a look at that if you want to learn more about what we mean by skills-based practices as an employer.
Thank you, Kathleen, for inspiration and for bringing us home today. So let's hear it for Kathleen.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Nicole. Well, you can see that I'm smiling. What a great way to end the day here with Hillary Clinton coming up in a moment. I want to first thank Alan Murray, who all of you saw this morning, is just a wonderful moderator, has been a wonderful partner to the Shared Value Initiative and the Change the World list. So glad to have Alan back this afternoon in conversation with Hillary. I have a rhetorical question for all of you. And it's a serious one. How does one introduce Hillary Clinton? Yes, I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, seriously. I had a couple of options in mind. Number one, I thought, well, I could talk about her biography. I could talk about what has been a lifetime of public service, literally decades working to the advancement of others at all stages of her career and life. But I didn't think I could do that justice in 5 minutes. And right before I walked up here, they told me I actually only had 3 minutes. So that wouldn't work. I could talk about our extensive relationship with the Clinton Global Initiative, the linkages between our organizations. The SVI, where you are today, was launched as a CGI commitment in 2012. Very proud of that. But that didn't feel quite right either. So I thought, well, I could go the personal route. I'm the father of 3 little girls that my wife and I spend as much time as we can pointing them to the examples of strong, successful women. Of course, women just like Hillary Clinton. But none of this seemed just quite right to me, and so I didn't know what to do, and probably like a lot of you, when I don't know what to do, I go into learning mode and I ask others. So I convened a panel. It's true, I convened a panel over breakfast last week, and I have to set the stage for you. There's Lego waffles, there were some bagels, some people requested them with cream cheese on, some to the side. And it was with my 3 daughters, Grace, who's 9, Lucia, who's 7, and Vivian, who's 5. And I said to them, girls, I will have a chance next week to introduce Hillary Clinton at our summit. And of course, the first response was, well, why? And what are you doing there? And I said, okay, Dad's asking the questions. But I need some help. And I said, girls, can you tell me one word to you which would describe Hillary Clinton? And as any of you know who are parents, harmony at home, let me just say, is often a little bit elusive. But they all agreed on one word very quickly. And they said, Dad, the word is courage. So I decided that the best introduction that I could provide to Hillary Clinton was a quote about courage, and hopefully what she means to many of us who are engaged in this work and shared value. And I found a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., and I'll read it to you. Courage is an inner resolution to to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardness is submissive surrender to circumstances. Courage breeds creativity. Cowardice represses fear and is mastered by it. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And then there comes a time when we must take a position that is neither safe nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Hillary Clinton.
That this morning.
Wow. Secretary Clinton, I sat up here this morning and no one stood, no one clapped. They didn't do anything for me.
But they have now.
But thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation. I want to start with, there's a page in your book where you say, if I had been elected, here's what I would have done. And you talk about the infrastructure problem, you talk about the job training problem, you talk about green energy. And I think the question that we're dealing with in this room today is, can the private sector pick up the slack there? How much of that stuff can the private sector do? Because the companies in this room consist of companies who want to see if they can make progress in that area.
Well, Alan, I certainly think that the private sector can pick up a lot of the slack. And I'm hoping that it will, because just the problems that you mentioned that I did write about are urgent, and they have a dramatic impact on our economic growth and our future shared prosperity. So it isn't possible, I don't believe, to pick up all of the slack, 100% of the slack. But I think it's imperative that more and more companies do. For example, you mentioned clean energy, and I've been personally very relieved that a lot of companies have said we're going to keep moving toward clean renewable energy, despite the fact that we were pulled as a nation out of the Paris Agreement and now have the dubious distinction of being the only nation in the world not in the Paris Agreement. So the more that businesses themselves can continue doing what they were doing for efficiency reasons as well as impact, and work in partnership with cities and states and other countries that have the same shared goals. Same with infrastructure. Just last Friday, I gave a speech to something called the Regional Planning Association here in New York that puts out a report every 4 years about infrastructure and planning ideas. And of course, it's especially important in a place like the tri-state area because a lot of our infrastructure is old and aging. And there is one particular project called the Gateway Tunnel, which some of you may have heard of, which is to build another tunnel under the Hudson River because we have two 100-year-old tunnels. Now, realistically, if you are looking at the economic impact of this area on the entire national and global economy, it's significant. It's about 10% of the entire United States. And so in a smart way, you'd be planning for that. Now, that is not a project that business alone can do. But business can speak out for that project, can explain why in economic terms it's very much in line with the bottom line. So I think in these areas of incentives and really necessities, prerequisites in some cases, for continuing and accelerated economic growth, as well as dealing with other problems like climate change. I think that business can do a lot, and I would hope that many would see that and follow through.
And this, of course, is the same line of thinking that the Clinton Global Initiative was involved in for a decade. This is similar to what many of the people in the shared value movement are doing. Did you see over that period a steady increase in business interest? So, yeah.
Really, very much. I mean, the Clinton Global Initiative was at root a way of bringing different groups, different interests into the same arena, and then finding and promoting ways for people to cooperate. So lots of private sector businesses, not-for-profits, governmental entities. And it was exciting because very often, in order to make a social impact with a product or a service that the business already provides, you do need to get out of the C-suite. You've got to get out and meet other people who can come up with creative ways of utilizing whatever it is that you are offering. And we saw that, just time and time again. And some of it was, very much in line with the shared values concept of what can we do to make a contribution with a product that we have. So you have a Procter & Gamble with a clean water component, and they have some market for that, but really the people who need it the most are the poorest people in the world, and they're not exactly a big part of the market. So how do you bring that about? And they partnered through the Clinton Global Initiative with charities that helped them bring their product into very remote places in order to provide potable water. And then eventually some governments paid for that. So, it's not a huge moneymaker, but it is a great way to use something that has been invented as a result of the intellectual capital of a company for purposes for people that would otherwise be left out.
One of the changes that has happened that's kind of surprising and interesting. I mean, when you first entered the political arena, people thought of business as being part of the Republican Party and labor as being part of the Democratic Party. And now, as you point out, businesses on the more progressive end of some of these issues, like climate change. Mm-hmm. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells us that we're a very practical people, and that we need to encourage that practicality, because what we should be focused on is solving problems. And that requires bringing everybody with a good idea under the framework of shared values to the table in order to brainstorm, work together, and reach a result. It is an unfortunate consequence of our highly partisan atmosphere right now, that people are at loggerheads over a lot of these potential opportunities. So I would hope that through events like this, through the FSG commitment to shared values, more and more companies and potential partners would understand why this is important. I'll give you an example, two examples, quick ones. When I was senator from New York for 8 years, I learned there was this big disconnect. You had one of the most highly productive agricultural sectors in any state in upstate New York and on the far end of Long Island, and you had one of the biggest food markets in the world here in New York City, but they were not connected. And it struck me as a failure of networking, and what I began to do, using like the Cornell Ag School, was to bring together farmers and producers from upstate New York with food brokers and restaurants from New York City. And it didn't take a whole lot for them to be sitting at the same table and all of a sudden having one of the food brokers say to the farmer, well, we don't buy corn from this part of upstate New York because you put it in burlap bags instead of crates. If you put it in crates, we'll buy it. Well, nobody had ever shared that information. And we began a big effort to try to open lines of communication and literally put people at tables to be able to have that conversation. When I was Secretary of State, I started the first ever global partnership initiative aimed at solving problems. And one of the big problems that we addressed was the impact on cooking in causing respiratory diseases that were actually the fourth leading cause of death in the world, mostly among women and girls who were bending over those cook stoves, you know, breathing the fumes of wood and dung and other materials, and using open fires to prepare their meals. So we said, look, there's got to be solutions to this. And there was a really small effort called the Global Cook Stoves Alliance. And what we determined to do, and my friend and colleague Chris Balderston, who's here, ran that office for me, we began reaching out to a lot of companies around the world and reaching out to countries and saying, you could create a market with cleaner, more affordable, reliable cook stoves, but you have to spend the time to research that. So the cook stoves for northern China were not going to be the same as the cook stoves for sub-Saharan Africa. And now there are hundreds and hundreds of members of this alliance and dozens of companies that have created a market.
And it's a profitable business for them.
You know, it's not a big margin because people can't afford it, but it is building a business and creating that market.
Yeah. So the other thing we were talking about this morning with Deval Patrick, who was here, is the fact that that you also now see CEOs speaking out on social issues. If you think about what Ken Frazier of Merck did after the Charlottesville riots, resigning from the President's Council, Ed Bastian at Delta canceling discounts for the NRA, Bank of America taking a strong stand in North Carolina about transgender access to public bathrooms. Those are all issues that I'm pretty confident, having watched this thing for a while, 10 years ago, none of them would have done.
Right.
What's going on there?
Well, I think children are talking to their parents, number one.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, because a lot of these issues are really at the forefront of profound cultural and social change. In addition, I would mention REI, which said they were no longer going to buy products produced by the manufacturer of the AK-47, Dick's Sporting Goods, which said they weren't going to carry AR-15 and other automatic weapons, and we're going to raise the age for purchase to 21. Walmart followed suit. And I think part of it is a very strong movement that has gotten stronger since the election, really, by people who are using their energy to, you know, speak up and make their point. And Starbucks with dealing with a very unfortunate and unacceptable situation in one of their stores, closing their stores for a day, which, you know, is clearly a money loser for them, but they're going to try to do a better job of dealing with bias and discrimination. And I think part of it is that there truly are a lot of pressures now on CEOs that weren't there. One of the advantages of an online world is that people can highly organize quickly to make their views known. And most companies follow social media pretty closely because, you know, one bad review, one hit on a product can have ramifications far beyond anything that was possible 10 years ago. So there are many forces at work, but I also think on some of these issues, the CEOs themselves are among the many millions of Americans who have evolved and understood a broader definition of you know, human rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, the kinds of issues that are very much in the atmosphere.
So the interesting thing about that is that at the same moment that you have more and more companies joining groups like the Shared Value Initiative, you have leaders feeling a need to project that they're doing good in the world because of the pressures you talked about. At the same time that's happening, faith in capitalism is clearly declining. You've seen the polls, particularly among young people, but in your own party, in the Democratic Party. I mean, you were challenged by a self-proclaimed socialist. We thought they had died in the 1990s, and there he was. How do you deal with that?
Well, I have to say that the reputation of capitalism is pretty much in tatters for young people. And for people who feel disadvantaged and damaged by the last financial crisis. So in Iowa, for example, which obviously is an important state in the selection of nominees for president, a very clear indication of what was happening was that 41% of self-identified Democrats also self-identified as socialists.
What was the percentage?
41.
Wow.
Yeah. And then if you look at millennial polling, it's over 50. It's over 50%. Okay, so why is this happening? Well, look, I mean, this is the subject of a lot of great work by Michael Porter and Mark Kramer and others. But I would say from my perspective, business is so pressured now by market forces and by what I believe to be the upending of what corporations used to think about as the audiences that they were serving. Alan and I were talking backstage. I mean, you can trace the growth of the primacy of shareholder value to articles written by Milton Friedman and then many others starting in the 60s and the 70s, where what used to be the balancing of various factors within inside a corporation, and a corporation, remember, is a creation of the state. You know, you have to be chartered by a government to be a corporation, and the historical view was, you know, you do have to pay attention to the communities you're working in and serving, to your employees. You do get rewarded, or should, for long-term investments that are not going to pay off in the next quarter, maybe not the next 4 years, but are smart to make. That was all turned upside down on its head, and I think that was a great detriment. And then, of course, once that became the reality of most CEOs' lives, then it just picked up on an accelerating basis, so that, you know, your annual report became your quarterly report. Your quarterly report becomes your monthly report. Your monthly report is, you know, practically down to a weekly and maybe a daily report, where that's no time, that gives you no time to breathe, let alone plan and invest. And I don't think that our legal system, I don't think that our governments have really paid appropriate attention to trying to figure out how do we get the balance better. So now, like here with shared values, we're asking companies to add that on top of all the other pressures, and hopefully and thankfully a lot are, but the basic structure is not as friendly as it should be to the kind of social, political, and economic changes.
So how do we get the balance better?
Well, I think you need good examples like what you're doing here, some of the companies that are here, some of the decisions that have been made. But I think we you know, when I was a senator, when I ran for president, I had countless conversations with CEOs. And not just the enlightened ones that were going to support me, but others as well.
That's the definition?
It is, absolutely. And it was always a fascinating conversation, and some very big names of people. It's exhausting. It's really difficult to run a public corporation right now because of all these competing demands and the relentless pressure that is brought to bear by activist shareholders, by raiders, people who could care less about the long-term value of the corporation, could care less as to whether you ever trained employees or, you know, researched and developed new products. They are looking for whatever the return can be, as high as they can possibly see it. So I think a lot of company leaders are fully aware of this, but feel trapped by the environment in which they find themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, a Fortune 50 CEO said to me at one point last year, you know, if we don't fix this problem, the shared value problem, if we don't convince the next generation that this system works for society, we're going to lose our operating license. I mean, are we at a crisis point for capitalism?
Well, I think we're approaching it. I do, because the growth in inequality, income inequality, has clouded over the positive aspects of growth and development and personal and community advancement that capitalism has brought. Yeah. So that people are saying, what have you done for me lately, and what are you going to do for me tomorrow? And I don't see it. What I see is a lot of high visibility actors who are basically trying to increase the wealth that goes to the top 1%, who took the tax cut, claiming it was going to turbocharge investment, increase wages for employees, go into new plant and equipment, and basically it's going into stock buybacks and maybe some dividends, but it's not producing.
You don't think it's going into investment or employee
not at the rate it was promised. I mean, there's very little evidence of that. You know, maybe there's more going on than people are reporting on, but I think that the promise of that, which could have been a turning point for American capitalism. You know, I recall when I was a senator, we had the first Repatriation Act, remember? And, you know, I had a steady stream of CEOs coming to see me from companies, you know, in New York and around the country. And they all said, we're really gonna use this, we're gonna make these investments. And even George W. Bush now says, it just didn't happen. Yeah. It did not happen. And, you know, the money was brought back at a 5% rate, as I recall, and went into buybacks.
There's some evidence that it may be happening at a higher rate now, in part because we're at a point in the economic cycle where companies actually need to invest.
Yeah, that they might have very well done it without, but they
have some cash to do it with. Yeah.
But I think the extent of what's needed is not happening. In order to persuade these people that I think you're rightly identifying as giving up on market capitalism, I think that there has to be a more concerted effort and a public commitment by a lot of companies to do that.
Do you think CEO pay is an issue in that equation?
It always is an issue. And I mean, you know, the increasingly high ratio of CEO pay to average employee pay is a constant irritant. You know, when you get to 200, 300, 400 times what the median or average is, that's an issue. Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, democracy and to a great extent, capitalism really depends upon trust. You know, people have to trust. They have to trust the business they're doing business with, and they have to trust the government that governs them. Trust is the glue that holds a democratic market economy and democratic political system together. And right now, it's badly battered. And a lot of the actions that are being taken by people in the business world just are blaringly insensitive to people who are out there looking at it happening.
You may be the only presidential candidate since World War II that actually had to stand up and say, I am a capitalist. And you did. Did it hurt you?
Probably. I mean, you know, it's hard. It's hard to know, but I mean, if you're in the Iowa caucuses and 41% of Democrats are socialists or self-described socialists, and I'm asked, are you a capitalist? And I say yes, but with appropriate regulation and appropriate accountability. You know, that probably gets lost in the, oh my gosh, she's a capitalist.
I mean, even.
But I did. You know, I talked about my father, who was a very, very, very small businessman. I mean, really a small businessman, and you know, I watched how hard he worked, and I watched how that hard work was rewarded, and that he gave us a very comfortable middle-class life, which was, really a great benefit to me personally. So, yes, I mean, I support hard work. I support risk-taking, entrepreneurial energy, but we're out of balance right now. I mean, we are weighed way too much toward the biggest companies, the ones with the most influence, and too many of the people in the corporate world are using their funds to really disrupt and undermine our democracy. So it's a kind of double hit.
Well, let's talk about our democracy, because as you know, Michael Porter has said that the biggest economic problem we have is the dysfunction in our politics, and that dates back to some time. I mean, some people would look at 2011, the inability to come to a budget agreement in the face of a debt downgrade was, whoa, we can't even do that. Right. How do you see us getting out of this? What's the path out of the dysfunction?
I will give you a very simple partisan answer. Change the Congress in November. Elect Democrats.
That doesn't really get us out of it.
But I'll tell you, it helps, Alan, and here's why. So there is a pattern over the last 40 plus years where Republican presidents spend us into debt with big tax cuts, big expenditures, and Democratic presidents, my husband and Barack Obama being Exhibit A and B, come in and have to do some really tough, heavy lifting. Balancing the budget, getting us to a surplus, in Bill's case, dealing with the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and spending a lot of money to kind of lift us out of that in Barack's case. So I think, we should never be where we are right now. I will be the first to say that. And when I was a senator, I worked with practically every Republican on something. I did. And so I really believe the country works better when we have two strong, functioning parties, but
that can work together.
That will work together, that will try to find some common ground. But unfortunately, the pressures on the Republican Party now are so intense that Republicans who I know better. I know they know better. I know them. I've worked with them. Are pushed into these corners where they are not acting in their constituents' interests. They're certainly not acting in the long-term interests of the country. And we're going to have to rebalance our politics for a while and try to show that we can once again make decisions. You mentioned 2011. I was Secretary of State. I was in Hong Kong in July, the first time the threat was made to shut down the government. And I was speaking to like the equivalent of the Chamber of Commerce. And all these business leaders were coming up to me saying, is your government really going to shut down? And of course I said, oh, no, it's just political grandstanding. Don't worry about it. Won't happen. Which as Secretary of State, I thought that was the right thing to say. And
I probably thought it was true at the time.
Well, in July I thought it was true. And when you get to a point where the greatest economy in the most long-lasting democracy is going to be deliberately damaged, undermining the full faith and credit of the United States of America, we are in serious trouble. And unfortunately, there's too much of that kind of thinking, and it's not well-informed, it is not evidence-based. So I think we have to work our way out of this electorally and try to break the hold that the right and ideological and commercial interests have on the Republican Party to try to get back into some better balance.
Well, you can argue the chicken and the egg and who went first and who drove it, but there's no question that, I mean, we were just talking about it, your party as well is backing itself into a corner.
And they should recognize what that will mean, because I come from the school of thinking that I don't have all the answers, and I don't believe that anybody does, and therefore what we need to do is listen to each other and try to hear what is being said, and then look for this common ground, similar to what businesses that are interested in shared values are doing as well. The problem is that, that's not very exciting. I mean, when you think about it. I mean, I worked so hard to have sensible, smart, effective policies and how we would pay for them, which I do think is part of the obligation. And oh my gosh, what a yawn. And I kept waiting. There will be a moment when it will actually matter how you're going to fund your infrastructure project, because we were both advocating for infrastructure, for example. Never came. And so if our politics is moving more into reality TV show land and entertainment, that makes it even harder, Alan, because people who are seriously committed to working together are going to find it harder and harder to be heard and to try to create those coalitions that are needed to get anything done.
Yep. Who's your 2020 candidate?
I don't have one. I think every time I'm asked that, I say 2018, focus on 2018. Don't put the cart before the horse.
We had Deval Patrick here. Do you think he's a potential?
I am not commenting on any individual.
If I ask you 3 or 4 times, it won't change the answer?
It won't change the answer.
All right, let's take some of these questions then, because they'll do better than I'm doing. Can you talk about the power of women in driving stronger business? What do you think the role of diversity is?
Oh, I think it's everything. I mean, we now have evidence that diverse decision-making leads to better results. And we also have evidence that, women in decision-making positions, in particular, bring often a different perspective, sensibility, set of experiences. So it's imperative that we continue to diversify our workforce and our business leadership. I spent a lot of time as Secretary of State talking about this because there's some really compelling research done by the IMF, the World Bank, OECD, Goldman Sachs, other groups that basically concluded all the same thing, that every country, including ours, is leaving GDP on the table because we have not empowered women to be more involved in business and be rewarded for their involvement. And in our case, it's about 9%. In some places, you can imagine in the Middle East and some parts of Asia, it can be like 30%. So if we're trying to figure out how we're going to grow the global economy, there are many things we have to do, but one of them is open the doors for women and other groups to have a real chance at being successful. And women-owned businesses are the fastest growing part of small business formation, but they don't get anywhere near the access to capital that men who start businesses do. Venture capitalists and other funders overlook a lot of women who have good ideas, have the sweat equity. So we've got to provide more support for true access to capital as well.
You, as Secretary, you've had the opportunity to see this around the world. One of the questions is how does the trust in businesses' ability to create shared value and have social impact vary by regions of the world?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that in the West, we consider Europe, Canada, the United States as making that up. I think that a lot of European countries have done more to try to influence decisions by businesses. For example, some countries are mandating quotas for board members and mandating, particularly women being brought onto boards. Some are mandating how their sovereign wealth funds will invest and how they can have a social impact as well as a financial reward. So I think there are examples that may not be applicable to us, but which demonstrate some places are much more sensitive and trying to be successful. Much of the rest of the world are not even debating this. I mean, it's not, and when you have a command and control economy like China, businesses.
It's all national interest.
Yes, all national interests, security interests, competitive interests. But it is true that I wouldn't call it shared values, but I would call it recognizing value, that in China, their investment in clean energy, they intend to be the biggest clean energy manufacturer and exporter, even though most of the innovation has been developed elsewhere in the United States and Europe, and we're just leaving that. We're not competing at all. So I think they may define value differently, but they view their principal value as continuing to raise incomes, moving more and more people into the middle class, and influencing global markets because of what they're investing in right now. So I guess Japan, when Prime Minister Abe first came in, he called me and he said, well, I want to do more to bring women into the workforce, because he looked at the same figures I just referenced, and he said, look, we've had a stagnant economy for a long time. If I can get women in the workforce, that will provide a boost. But he ran into problems, because why aren't women in the workforce? Because they're taking care of children and they're taking care of aging relatives. And there is no social structure that has been implemented to provide those services. They also don't allow immigration. So they're an aging country and they don't have an incoming supply of young workers. So, he quickly ran into some obstacles, but he had the right idea.
So, question, how do we incent business to create shared values, and where should the pressure come from? We were talking about this earlier this morning. When I ask business leaders that question, they tell me their employees first, and then their consumers. And as you said earlier, it's the capital markets that have been kind of last to the game. But is there anything you can do to change those incentives?
Well, I think there are a number of things that could be done. I think one is looking at how the pressure for quarterly returns is manipulated by outside actors to keep CEOs in a constant state of anxiety. That's certainly what they tell me. And some of the biggest companies in this country, their CEO said, I'm always looking over my shoulder. I can't even look straight ahead. I can't figure out, okay, what do I do today, tomorrow, and the next day, because I've got people coming at me from behind. And I think we should do a very thorough vetting of our corporate laws at this point, because we know what has happened in the last 40 years. We're in this situation in part because laws changed as well as behaviors. And I think we should look at that. I'm not going to sit here and say I know the answers, but how do we get to more companies being incentivized to make long-term investments? Our primary tool is the tax code. Okay, we're going to let you write off this investment much faster, and maybe that will get you to do it. But I think there should be a more broad view about what might work. And then looking at different forms of corporate formation. So the B Corp is something that's just getting started. Maybe we should be taking a hard look at that, and how many advantages can we incentivize that, because it's a clear statement that you want to be looking for shared value.
You of course are talking to the believers here in this room, but what would your advice to them be when they go back to their companies on how to advance the cause?
Well, first of all, I think that what you're doing here is critically important, and you're really at the forefront of what I hope will be a movement. And trying to get your companies to do things that will produce results. Nobody's asking any company to make decisions that will undermine your fiscal well-being and take away your potential for growth, but look for those opportunities of making investments, of pursuing new lines of business that can make a real difference. I'll give you an example from New York. So, Corning is one of the great New York companies, and I don't know if anybody's here from Corning, but I've done a lot of work with them as a senator. And they came up with a technology to clean diesel exhaust. And one of the big problems we had in New York and across the country is that school buses were primarily diesel in most places, and so the exhaust would often exacerbate asthma and other conditions among kids who rode on those buses. So I teamed up with some other senators, and we created a program inside the, as I recall, the Energy Department, to fund experimentation in outfitting school buses because no school district could afford to go and buy all new natural gas clean buses. They could eventually, but not in the short run. And then we worked with Corning to accelerate their production because it was a win-win. It was going to help the company, but it was also going to help these school districts. And so if you're looking at health as one of the shared values, what can you do in your company to promote that? And obviously, different answers are possible, or clean energy, or environmental cleanups, whatever it might be.
So one last question from the audience. I've read what happened. I suspect many people here know your account of the 2016. If you haven't,
better hurry up and do that.
Or at least buy it. But what will you tell your granddaughter about the 2016 election and what it says about our society and the role of women?
Oh my gosh. Well, she's only 3.
So you have a little time.
Yeah. But I'll also tell my grandson, who's 22 months, I'll tell them both to read my book when they can.
Well, we're looking for the children's version.
Yeah, the children's version. Well, look, I lay out in the book what I do think happened, and I finished writing the book last end of June, and everything since then has proven more and more that the factors that I laid out were really instrumental. But I have a whole chapter entitled On Being a Woman in Politics. And I wrote that chapter because it was, for me, a difficult experience at a number of points in the campaign because of the double standard, because of people's expectations, because of how the campaign would be covered. And I wanted to make the point that, yes, I had these experiences, and I lay some of them out in the chapter, but it's not just about me, and it's not just one candidate, one election, one time, because obviously I was well aware people would answer polling or reporters' questions like, oh yeah, I'd vote for a woman, just not that woman. But then, after I was not in the political arena, all of a sudden, similar things start being said about other women who maybe will run for president, or even if they don't, they're high profile. And I think we still have a ways to go. And there was just a poll in the last week or two which found that 60% of Republicans said they did not care if we ever had a woman president. In fact, they were perfectly satisfied with there not being a woman president. So, there was some comparable, there was some people on a much smaller level in the Democratic Party who would say that. But when you have one of your two major parties basically saying it's not a big deal and all the rest, you can see how that adds burdens to women running to be our first woman president. So I would explain the best I could to my grandchildren. And I was raised by parents who said, don't accept limits, work hard, learn everything you can. They never thought I'd ever run for president, neither did I, but the underlying message was the same. And I think we're at a point in how we view women where there is some pushback, and there is some I think, pressure on women at all levels of society right now, and you see that online all the time. If you're online and you're a woman, often if you are speaking out on politics or speaking out on equal pay or paid family leave or issues that are important to you and other women, you will probably have a pretty quick and negative reaction. So we have to make sure, and I'll do this the best I can with my granddaughter and grandson, you know, we have to develop confidence, resilience in our kids. And yet we also have to be sure that for both our boys and girls, they recognize that we can't live in an adversarial world and be as successful as we should be. The United States is better positioned than any country in the world to grow our economy, to lead politically and strategically, as well as economically and socially. The only thing that can stop us is ourselves. You know, not only the point that Michael Porter made about our own political dysfunction, but also about the fears that unfortunately are being fanned among people about change. You know, change is inevitable. You cannot stop it, but you can manage it, and you can try to figure out ways that it is more positive than negative. So I hope that we get back to problem solving, we get back to communicating, and that certainly is what I would tell my grandchildren or, you know, any young person in our country. Don't look over your shoulder. Look forward. You know, deal with the changes. Figure out how you can take advantage of them and not be crushed by them, and bring others along with you. Because if we do that, then I think we have reasons to be optimistic. But if we get mired into all this negativity and scapegoating and finger pointing and everything that we're seeing too much of today, we're doing the work for other countries. You know, we are giving great gifts to leaders who don't share our values and really want to see the United States diminished. So we can't, in my view, afford to let that happen.
Secretary Clinton, thank you.
Thank you.
An inspiring message.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary Clinton. Thank you, Alan. I started that last session, or ended my introduction there with a quote. I'll read you just the first line again because I think it accurately sums up Secretary Clinton's perspective. Courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Yesterday I opened by saying that we were trying in the Shared Value Initiative to move from fragility to strength. And I hope you all are steeled for that journey, see the Shared Value Initiative as a partner in it, and are ready for your next step. I hope you'll help me with one final thanks before we go have a drink. And could I ask the Shared Value Initiative team to come join me on the stage just very briefly. So Stacy Neal, Kathy Lynch, thank you. We've got Stacy, Kathy, Alicia, Georgie, and Stephanie, and they truly are the ones that put all of this together and make sure that everyone has a great time, as well as obviously the hotel staff and the event staff and everything. And I just, from the deepest part of my heart, since of course this is my last time here, I'm so inspired and honored to work with them. And you know, oftentimes people say to me, you know, you do all of this with 6 of you, and the answer is yes, but we do it with the 6 of us and all of you. So join me in one last round of applause, and let's grab a drink. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Georgie. Yep.